Alright, so let's continue. So now we need to write the rules for the update method, and for that we first need to add in the allow statement for the update as such, and then for the conditions we only want to check two things: that the request that the user is making in order to update the link document, that request is only updating the total clicks field. That's one check. They can only update the total clicks, no other field except the total clicks, one condition. The other one would be that they can only update it if they are incrementing the value by 1. So these are the two things that we need to check. So let's do that. And for this, let's first create a function which we can name as verify link update. So within this we will be doing both the conditions, like we are going to write both the conditions. And for this we again need to have the incoming data, but this time let's actually understand what exactly this thing is. So let me just open up the docs in order to better make you understand. So security rules, what is it? The request dot resource variable. So this thing request. So one second. Okay, it actually doesn't have these things. Maybe this page. Yep, I think this is the one. Alright, so as per the docs, it says that the request dot resource, this variable contains the future state of the document if you allow the request. So over here we referred this thing, the data, or to say the request dot resource dot data, this thing as the incoming data, because this will be the future state of the document, the data of the document if you allow the request. So as we were kind of writing the conditions for the create method, which means the document will be first created. So that's the reason why we referred this as the incoming data. Because if you allow the request, this is the future state. And it means that this is the data which the user passed in. That's exactly the reason why we referred it as the incoming data. But when we are updating a document, instead of naming it as incoming data, we should be referring it as the future doc, or to say the future doc data, you can say. The reason is because this thing will not only contain the incoming data, or to say the fields that the user is trying to update, but also it's going to merge both of these two things. Like it's going to merge the previous state and the updated one. So instead of naming it as the incoming data, it makes more sense to name it as future doc if the request is allowed. The other thing is we will be using the resource dot data, which is another variable, just like request dot resource, it's resource dot data. So this thing, it contains the data of the requested variable. As you can see, is a map of all the fields and values stored in the document. So this thing right over here in this scope, it states or it denotes the data of the document, the current data of the link document which the user is trying to update. So we will be referring it as current doc in such a way. So now that we have these two maps, these two objects, we just need to compare these two, and we just need to check that the only difference is that the total clicks is being changed or it's being modified. So that's the first condition. And in order to do that, we can again open up the security rules data type page. And the other thing is I'm intentionally going through the docs and stuff, because when you will be writing rules for your own project, you will be going through the same thing. So it's kind of important to get familiar with the entire thing. So we used a couple of different data types. We used the map, the list. We covered these two, as well as the string and the timestamp. So now we will be using the map diff, this thing. So this data type it represents the difference between two maps. And the way that we create this data type is by calling the diff method on a map. So we call this method on the map which we first, like the first map that we want to compare the other one with. I think that didn't make sense. Like using this, we can compare two maps. We have to call this thing on the first map, and then we have to pass in the other one as an argument, and then it's going to return back the map diff data type, the value which is the map diff, which follows the map diff type, something like that. So after we do this, after we have the map diff, we can call the different methods which are available on it, and we will be using the affected keys, this method. So when we call this method on the map diff, it returns back a set. A set is kind of like a list, but there are actually few differences, which are that it's an unordered collection, plus it cannot contain duplicate items. But for the overall part, you can assume this to be a list. And the reason is because you can call the same has only method which we used on the list earlier while writing the other rules. So we will be using the same thing to check that the only difference between the current and the future state is the total clicks, in order to make sure that the user is just trying to update that particular field. So for that, over here, let's return. We first need to, well, actually we can use the future doc, the diff method, and we can pass in the current doc. So this thing is now the map diff, on which we can call the affected keys as such, this method, which will return back the set containing all the keys, and on that we can call the has only. So as we know that the has only, it takes a list and we have to pass it in that way. So we will be passing in a list with a single field, the only field which we want to allow to be updated, and in this case it has to be the total clicks. So now let's try calling this function over here, and there are actually few things that we need to change. Firstly, we will be changing the simulation type to be of update, and then we have to pass in a path which actually exists on a database, this thing. The reason is because this security rule, we are testing the update one. So this security rule, the way that we structure the rules, or to say we use the playground. So it means that we do, like, there should be a document already which should already exist. So for that, let's actually get to the sub collection of links, and over here we can get the path using this thing. So let's copy the entire thing and let's pass it over here, as that's what we will be testing against. So it means that the UID, this thing, the second segment, it has to be used in the Firebase UID as well. And now let's build up the document, and now let's try passing in a field in order to update the document. So let's pass in the name one first, which should be denied. And once we run this request, you will see the detailed information which will make more sense. And just a second, it says that null value of error. 1 second. Resource, because I made a typo. Now if I try running this thing, it should be denied, and on the right side you will see the detailed information, which is absolutely amazing, because you will actually understand where exactly it went wrong step by step. So let's start with the future doc. So this thing, it represents the future state if you allow the request. So 1 second, not this thing, it should be this one, the future doc, this thing. So as we are passing the name field of this value, so if you allow this request, then the future state of the document will look like this. As you can see, the name will be changed to this thing. Then when we are using the diff in such a way, it has its own internal way in order to make sure that which field is being changed, is getting changed. So as you can see, the total clicks is unchanged, the same thing for all of them except the name one, as that's what we are trying to update. So it's so good that you can actually break down the entire process, like how it's working. Then for the current doc, if we take a look, this is the state before the changes are applied. As you can see, it's the same state. And then when we call the affected keys, it returns back a set containing the keys, which is name. Exactly what we are passing over here. Perfect. And for the has only, it will be false because it contains, it doesn't match with the list that we are passing. Once again, over here, as you can see. So that is perfect. We can actually see the breakdown ourselves, which is great. So that's one thing that we have checked. The other thing is it should be incremented by 1. So for that, along with this check, we can add in double ampersand. And for that thing, what we can do is, and by the way, you may have to rewatch the video in case it didn't make sense. Even for me, it was a bit tricky to get it the first time, and that's why I'm kind of trying real hard to explain it so that you don't go through the same thing. Anyway, now we just need to check that the field is only being updated if it is being incremented by 1. So for that, we have the future and the current doc. So we just need to check if the future doc double, if the future doc dot, one second, total clicks, if the total clicks field of the future doc is double equals to the current doc dot total clicks plus 1 in such a way. So we only want to allow if the total clicks is being incremented by 1 than what it was like earlier, which I think it made sense. So if we do this thing, and let's try building up a document first, total clicks, a number, and I think we can actually, let's pass in a random number for the time being, just to see the denial, like the denied request. It should fail, and the reason should be, one second, the reason should be, well, actually the has only should be true, as we are just passing the field which we are expecting. However, the future doc dot total clicks, this thing, which should be, yeah, this one right over here, this thing should be false, not this thing, this should be false. So yeah, now if we try passing in the total clicks, which is actually the incremented value, as you can see right now it is 8. So let's pass in the total clicks, which is supposed to be a number, and if we pass in 9, then this should be allowed. Let's see. So that's great. Perfect. So it means that the checks for the rules, like for the updates, are working, and I think that's it. Maybe I might be missing something, but I think for the most part this is it. It was pretty interesting, and let me just see. So we are reading, which covers the get and list, the delete only the owner can do, the create the owner can do, verify required fields, verify field types, verify field values, and I remember we can change this thing. We can uncomment the entire thing. Let's do that over here. We can remove this in such a way. I think that's it. The real test would be if we tested on the actual, like on the live version of the application. So let's do that first. We have, like, we are hosting the application, so we can just open the link. This is the one. Okay, so that's working. As you can see, we are able to get the documents of the authenticated user. So now let me just open the console to see in case if anything goes wrong. So if we try deleting the document, it should work. Let's see. So that's perfect. It's working. Great. Let's try creating a document. And we need to pass in the name. Let's pass in website. So this thing it actually requires a lot of different checks. So this thing, if it is working on the front end, so that's great. It means all the different checks are being validated, like they are being checked. So the website URL, let's pass in something like this. If we try creating it, it is throwing an error. Okay. So yeah, we kind of need to check this thing. Let's do one thing. One second. Let's do one thing. Okay, let's change this thing to be of create instead of passing the. Let's have the same old path, which is this one. Let's build up a document, which for the name it has to be the same thing that we are passing from the front end. The long URL has to be, and this is kind of the reason why we cannot really depend upon the security rules to show any error, because as you can see, the error is very generic. We can't really figure out what exactly went wrong, and that's why we have to test things as well. So now let's actually pass in the same URL that we are passing over here. For the total clicks, it has to be 0. For the short code, it would be a 6 characters thing. And then I think what is missing? Why do I always keep getting confused on this part? Created at, obviously. Oh yeah, I do think the reason is, which is kind of obvious, the reason is because we have set the created art to be less than the request.time. So this would be the actual test if we just set it to be of double equals. So if we do that, and let's update the rules, let's refresh, which we didn't have to, and if we try creating a document, the same data, now this should be allowed. Perfecto. That's exactly, that was the thing which was going wrong. Well, that is beautiful. Everything is working so great. Alright, so the create worked, the read is working, the update should work as well. Let's test that out. And I will be using the incognito because the user doesn't have to be authenticated. So if we visit this, they are being redirected and it's actually a website. Okay, so that's surprising. And if we refresh, it should be incremented. So that is perfecto. Alright, so yeah, the delete worked, the create is working, the update is working, the read, yeah, it's the same thing. Alright, so I think that is it for the rules part. Well, this one was pretty interesting, really. Enjoyed myself writing the rules. And now I think we just need to fix a few things on the web application. The other thing is I was actually playing around with the application and then I got to know the regex that we used on the front end. This thing is not entirely secure, like it's not validating the actual URL, because if you pass in something like a URL like this, something like this, it still validates it as a URL. Like if we pass this thing, or to say the www as well, like without the TLD, the top level domain, this thing still works. So yeah, this should not happen. And the funny part is that it's still being validated within the security rules, which should not happen. But I think it is. Well, 1 second. Just a second. I will be. Okay, so this thing, if we just validate this thing, the regex as such, and let's try creating a document with the same URL that I passed in over here. Then if this thing works out, then it means both the regex that we are using, they are kind of faulty. So it didn't work. Might be because of some other reason. Yup, the UID is not the same. If I try this thing, so yeah, it's working within the security rules as well. So it means both the regex that we are using on the security rules as well as on the front end, they are not. It turns out that they are not that great at doing their job. Now, obviously, there will be a regex out there which does the job, but I think we do get the point how to do it. So I will be skipping that part, and let's directly jump onto the web application and let's fix a few things on this one.